Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are now at the crossroads of government. And once again, I say to listeners of Moving Forward in St. Lucia and in the diaspora, welcome. And as always, I'm proud to be here with you. Tonight, I send to you by the Holy Spirit. And therefore, I do feel elated in what I have to say because the Spirit is in me. Before I begin in earnest, I want to take the opportunity to send my condolences to Tom Walcott's family, who was the heart and soul of the Labour Party. I am truly sad about his passing because of our friendship over many, many years, even when I got frustrated with the party at one stage or another due to personal differences with an individual. I was without a doubt, or he was without a doubt, a legend in the transformation of what St. Lucia was and what it is today. Goodbye, dear friend, and may your soul rest in peace. I therefore sing in Paradisium on your behalf within myself. I also want to send my get well soon message to the Minister, Virginia Poyott, and to say to her to relax in order to make a speedy recovery. God bless you always. Oh, my brothers and sisters, in the One Most High, tonight I do not minimize the complexities of the problems that needs to be faced by this government in achieving a healthy economy, more so the mess that was left behind by the last government. But this present Prime Minister, in my view, is doing an excellent job of work because I will repeat again that it was simply a mess before he took up his position. It is one he has taken with great gusto and therefore must continue the good work he's doing with a second term in office. I say this with pride that is floating in my vein and which is sublime. However, I said this in all sincerity. That I'm convinced that we shall overcome because the Prime Minister has the will, the courage, and the insights to deal with such matters before him. And we have seen the determination to do so. However, my one wish is for the country to be repaid the $7.3 million that was paid to for vaccine during COVID-19 that we did not receive. I believe that the ex-Prime Minister should be paying us back, or paying the country back, or his salary should be deducted until the amount of money was paid. Why? Because he's genuinely prepared to undergo a mental and spiritual reevaluation of himself. He has to have a change of focus in the way he behaves. And from the last government, which will enable them and the people of this country to go forward into the bright light in the development of the country, they have to come together with the government. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are now truly seeing is that the things that seems real and powerful in the dictum of the last Prime Minister were indeed now unreal, such as the building of the 22 islands that was flaunted by the last government, which in my view was madness itself and simply a con trick because he was simply living in Cloud Cuckoo Land or the Never Never Land with his Chinese friends. Maybe, just maybe, he got carried away by what he saw in Dubai or what his Chinese friends convinced him of, especially their island building of the reefs in the South China Sea. But strangely, these islands are beginning to sink because the sea is retaking what was truly theirs. Having said all that, I really and truly do not minimize the complexities of the problems that this government faces in achieving a solid foundation for the development of this beautiful island of ours. However, I'm convinced that because of the lead or the leader we have, we shall have the will and the courage and the insight to deal with such matters that must be dealt with or to overcome the hurdles that lie or may come our way. Ladies and gentlemen, why am I so convinced that we will achieve the goals that are set before us? Because Philip has a vision, one which is simply different from what was before. He has a plan or strategy. And that strategy makes sense to others, which ideally creates the aha effect. And without a doubt, that vision is understandable by those entrusted with bringing it about. When I compare this Prime Minister to the last, there is a great difference. Philip has intelligence, initiative. He is persistent in dealing with problems and has that self-confidence that is needed when you lead. One of his major attributes is that he is on the alert in terms of others' needs and is not afraid to accept the responsibility he has been given to lead this country. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the title of this moving program is called that we are now, as I mentioned before, at the crossroads of government. I therefore say to the government, you are now over 2.5 years or 30 months in government, and July will be 3 years. Therefore, I would hope that lots are now in the pipeline in bringing to fruition this country forward into a brighter tomorrow. It is therefore important, Prime Minister, that under this Labour administration, you stay focused and that there is a strategic plan for the next period in government. I therefore say to the higher echelon of the party, we cannot wait for 5 years. By the 4th year and a quarter, we should be going to the public in a general election. We cannot waste time because time and tide waits for no man. We cannot afford to procrastinate because it is without a doubt the thief of time. Today, I have so much to say. However, before I go into overdrive, let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. O Father in heaven, we thank you with all our hearts for giving us a leader with integrity and one with humility. There is so much to be done because of what was left behind. And at present, the misinformation, disinformation, and the lies that seems to be coming from the United Pack is unscrupulous. And it's coming from unscrupulous individuals, more so their leader and deputy leaders. I therefore ask you, Great One, to give Philip the health and strength he needs to overcome adversity and to know what is best for the country. I know that you have chosen him because of who he is. Therefore, I put my faith and trust in you because you are without a doubt the Prince of Peace, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Amen. Tonight, I quote from the Bible, Matthew chapter 10, verses 26 to 31. So do not be afraid of people. Whatever is now covered up will be uncovered, and every secret will be made known. What I'm telling you in the dark, you must repeat in broad daylight. And what you have heard in private, you must announce from the housetops. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of God, who can destroy both body and soul in hell. For only a penny you can buy 2 sparrows, yet not 1 sparrow falls to the ground without your Father's consent. As for you, even the hairs on your head have all been counted. So do not be afraid. You are worth much more than many sparrows. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Once again, I'm somewhat overawed by the news that seemed to penetrate my bedroom that another few murders have occurred in the country. And consequently, the opposition seems to be gloating about this horrendous story because their only thought is this would deter people from supporting the government. They fail to realize that they have a lot to answer for, and that much of it was their fault from 2006 onwards, when it was all becoming a reality, hence Operational Restore Confidence. We must never forget that. We must not allow them to forget this when they try to blame this present government. This should not be about party per se, but it is a problem for the country as a whole. As I mentioned before, crime was incubating under their time in office since 2006 to 2011. That is why during that period we had, again, Operation Restore Confidence, which was done badly in a sense, and consequently some were overwrought in how to go about doing it. St. Lucians, whether you are a supporter of this government or not, these are facts, and therefore it is important that we open our eyes and therefore call a spade a spade. The important thing now is how we can come together to bring about peace and calm to our beautiful country. I'm convinced that there is so much we can do, but we must all be on the same wavelength. It is therefore only by working together and cooperating together we will achieve some success. Once again, I believe that our whole system of law and order have to be reformed and revamped. Money somehow must be found to help tackle the problem that confronts us in terms of crimes being committed, more so on our roads, in our communities, with loud music being played at will, people driving mad. The time has come when we should become a disciplined country if we are to develop in a serious manner. In going back to the question as to why 2006 to 2011, that Operation Restore Confidence was necessary, there is clear, this is clear as daylight, that if they had hold on, the crime Operation Restore Confidence would not have come into being if we had solved crime problems. I therefore return to the question as to who is to blame for the crime levels we are seeing, not only in St. Lucia, but in most of the Caribbean countries. There's no doubt in my mind that in the last 5 years, we have seen a deterioration in the norms and values of the people at all levels in this country. There is an attitude, greed, malice, dishonesty, lies, cunning, violent conflicts, laziness, and indiscipline, disrespect by the young to the older generation, and above all, the atrocious form of parenting that has now reared its head and was never anticipated in this beautiful country of ours. It may not only be in St. Lucia, but the question is why some countries like Taiwan and a few others in the world simply don't have that acute problem. We need to look at how other countries have dealt with the issue of crime and whether it is mainly on or is about indiscipline that has reared its head in an unsavory manner. Whether our laws are too lax, maybe, or is it that our police force is too weak in keeping law and order in this country? There is a saying that no one is above the law, whether rich or poor. The law should be equal in its delivery. There is no doubt that we saw it coming, and a stop was implemented during Stephenson King's administration, again with Operation Restore Confidence. This initiative, which was very successful for a time until we had the American government stepping in under the black President Obama. We must never forget that. What was really unbelievable is threatening us with the Leahy Law, which was brought into practice. But what did even further upset me is that this law was being applied to us while murders, or more so, of blacks by white policemen were taking place in the United States at will. The planting of unlawful items was part and parcel of their operation. We even went to the stage of having an inquiry by the Jamaican police with one St. Lucian among them, Leonard, my dear friend. And all the impacts inquiry clearly says is that much of what they are reporting is hearsay, to an extent because getting information was rather difficult. There's no doubt that the government may have to take some measures that will not go down well by some, but I'm sure the majority of St. Lucians are now sick and tired that every altercation is solved by the gun. It's at this juncture I'll take my first break, and I will be back. as I was saying about Operation Restore Confidence, I believe that many of our people are basically, I hate to say it, lazy, and believe that crime is their way of making money. But that is short-lived. Nor does it help with the development of the country. The government is doing its best in pushing a youth policy. However, many of our youth who do well get swell-headed and simply fail to contribute to the society on the whole. However, this is not only a problem with our youth, but also those who have gone to university, even those who acquire a doctorate. Question: how many of them pass on their knowledge in writing books or going out to explain things to the youth in terms of what can be achieved in taking the right path? We all have a role to play in that respect. The problem with the government and thinking is that many people here who can help in passing on their knowledge is hindered by the government, who sees their age as a factor or barrier when these individuals have experience, knowledge, and also are damn good workers. This is what exists in places like Taiwan, where the older generation is held in high regard and respect. Here it is simply about friendship and the make-believe class, that one is more so the same class structure that the colonials left behind. And like jackasses, we jump into it because, don't forget, colonialism had a conscience, or so some think. We have simply learned to exploit each other, and it's happening even in families. When I look back, I think of our parents, sweat and toil in the development of this country. Even the Labour Party we see today will not know how they came into being, how they came about. And it was so nice to talk to the governor, acting Governor General, on the 22nd, when he discussed it with me and how highly he rated my father because of what his father told him. I was somewhat taken aback because I had not said so before, but now I will. I say to the Prime Minister and others that I was very proud of that father of mine, because when the Labour Party started out as part and parcel of the trade union movement in St. Lucia, when those pushing at the time, it was George Charles himself, Emmanuel Springer, Mr. Augustine, as I used to call him, John Compton, and others. They were at the forefront of when that party came into being. I don't know if many of you Laborites know that. Yes, I proudly mentioned before that my father stood up to the English when they sent their warships into our harbor with their military force in order to patrol our streets with a 6 p.m. curfew because of the riots that occurred in terms of the trade union movement. It was clear that they did not want trade unionism in one of their colonies. However, they did not expect resistance by those violent historians of the Labour Party. I hope that the Prime Minister, more so the leader of the opposition, is aware of that. Somehow, I'm sure the leader of the opposition does not have a clue who Sir John Compton really was, and how he and the people, like my father, had to go to Curacao as painters, working damn hard to earn a living because there were no jobs in this country under colonialism. John was part of that group before his return, and then went on to do law. I also want to mention to the leader of the opposition that the party is not his party, as he has said openly. He had the gall to mention the words his party, more so in dealing with Janice Compton becoming an independent candidate. Or in my view, that was her choice, and she has the right. However, why should this stop her from getting a particular job with the National Trust? She was one qualified for the job. If he thought that the National Trust should raise their own money, when he stopped the subvention. Why was he interfering with whom they chose to lead them or get in a position in that society? This should show St. Lucians how malicious this individual can be. His party. He should, in my view, not be leading the United or the UWP ever again. It is the same when he told the opposition in government that they have no right to tell his government how to run the country. But now he would love to run the country with this government. This individual, in my view, is no more and nothing less but a pompous ass. Yet he had the audacity to call St. Lucians jackasses. Yet lo and behold, he felt that he should lead them, and in his view, the only one capable, or maybe because he has the light-colored skin, as I've said before. This is the same individual that called Kenny and his family a Massa family, yet he is even worse. This is also the same individual who's without a doubt, having been obstreperous in the House of Assembly on, as I've mentioned before, on several occasions. The man, in my view, has no class. And I'm sure if he had to give St. Lucia away to the Chinese, he would have done so lock, stock, and barrel. St. Lucians, let me remind you that this is the individual who pushed to kill off a major airline to the Eastern Caribbean, Liat. And now maybe Caribbean Airways, I don't know. So much so, to go to Martinique these days, if you are sick, you have to do so by hiring a helicopter. Yes, some of them can do so. But the poor, what about the poor? This guy literally did not care because he can pay to fly there or anywhere if he and his family had fallen sick. This government now needs to make every effort, together with our other Caribbean countries, more so in the Eastern Caribbean, in bringing back a form of LIAT in conjunction with the Caribbean governments, because it is essential when you think of students traveling, people on business, etc. I now say openly that we now must have an individual or two talking about corruption in the labor ministries without any foundation or naming names, or corruption prior to this government coming to office. Because this government is now talking about, this opposition, is now talking about corruption within within the government. And they have no facts to prove that. This cannot be accepted and must be taken to the courts. Yet we've always heard about alleged corruption on several occasions when he was Prime Minister, that's Alan, of this country. If that day was so, or that was so, did they have an inquiry? This is their methods of peddling propaganda about this government, because the government is picking up the mess they left behind. More so the monstrous box they call the state-of-the-art hospital. Let us not forget that. We will use it. In fact, this government will use it. This idea show they're thinking that our people are the mendicants, the jackasses, the barking dogs, and they, as they were called by the leader of the opposition. Now, overnight, he wants to pretend that he is a changed man who wants to work to the benefit of the poor of the country. Yet we are told that he has had alleged talks with the Chinese. Is it to hand over St. Lucia to them if his party should have a sniff of winning the next election? Well, for sure, there will be no tents to pass false votes under, because that will not be possible. Was this not what it was alleged? They tried, but had not anticipated that the police would have voted over 90% for the Labour Party, and therefore they were scrutinizing these tents to make sure it did not happen. Special prosecutor. These are the things that needs to be investigated. I say to you in all sincerity, that all I hear on the ground is that you are slow and will not get much done. Is that right? I do feel disappointed, honestly, when I hear this. So please, pull out your finger, as we say in England, because that is necessary. And I will help if possible, if called upon. Please show the public that you are working assiduously. What I have realized from the leader of the opposition and his mendicants is that they continually try to discern truth from fiction. When a leader has no consistent core ideology, logic, or style, the consequences can be disastrous. And we saw this when Alan was Prime Minister on a continual basis. St. Lucia today is full of conflict because it really began under Alan. However, if there's one thing that just about everyone agrees on, is that Alan is unfit to be leader of this country again. And at present, the leader of the opposition in the House, which he has simply walked off on several occasions, or walked out on, and simply refused to abide by the rules of the House, even as Prime Minister. The oddest thing is that it was impossible to discern any consistent core thinking, values, or logic from the way he handled the country or his party. Even his style then was inconsistent, and he showed impatience or indecisiveness, stubbornness, or changeability. He was not taken to task, the issues, or eager to avoid them. If one looks back, it was clear that his tax reform ideas was not meant to favor the disadvantaged, because in theory they were not well thought out, because in analyzing those tax reforms, it seems to move to the side of vested interests. When a leader has no consistent core ideology, as I've said, logical style, the consequences can be disastrous for the country or the organization he leads. I want to vehemently repeat that Alan, as Prime Minister or leader of the opposition, had no consistent core ideology or governing style, which in theory had many taken to the streets. One must remember that. Labour had to. There is no doubt that this individual was governing this country in an inconsistent manner until he was unceremoniously kicked out. It's at this juncture I'll take the second break, and we'll come back to discuss further. Welcome back to Moving Forward. And I want to take your mind back to 216 to 221. When one looks back, one has to consider how unbearable life had become for many more, or many people. So if you were not a United Workers or Wreckers of the Poor supporter, you were going to feel the pain. Any form of ploy to show their grievances was shut down, that is the poor, by the hierarchy of the police force he had put in place. I say to the powers that be at present that we have to take a long, hard look at St. Lucia's political system. We need to take a longer-term view and think about how to establish a system in which power and responsibility are clearly divided. We should no longer put up with a system in which leaders remain safe and comfortable in their posts, no matter how lousy a job they do. Reform or conditions is now urgent. If this is not to be, then I will personally have no alternative but to pull away from a soulless society. Reform is now necessary in many areas, before continuing, I must not forget that we have just celebrated 45 years of independence. And I'm still dumbfounded and need to ask the question, independence from what? When instead of being a colony, that's what we are still a colony where colonialism had a conscience, as voiced by some. Now it is a form of neo-colonialism. I believe that the time is ripe to move away from the form of colonialism, more so when we still call our police the Royal Police Force, and when our leaders in the House still have to bow to a silly maze as if it was a king or queen they were bowing to. I also believe that our national flag should be a strong symbol of statehood and national pride. That it is uniquely designed to represent this country's identity with colors and emblems, purposefully chosen, that embodies the history and common values shared by the people of the country. I personally want a system that we can all make a combined effort to create, one that responds to public opinion with a good system of government that benefits the people on the whole. It is only by doing this that we can enjoy a happy, joyful life, especially for our children and their children. Tonight I want to say once again that the unpalatable truth at this juncture, after Alan had 5 years in office as Prime Minister of St. Lucia, could have been simply termed as the blind leading the blind. The whole cabinet was horrendous as a government and simply hadn't any useful ideas in the development of this country. Yet one of those ministers had the audacity to tell the people of this country that they should not bite, as I mentioned last week, the hand that feeds them. This, in my view, was simply laughable. As I've said last week, what I did here, this government, ex-minister government, do, that I want to ask, that benefited the poor of this country. She simply forgot that when they came into office, they literally stopped the STEP program that the Labour Party had put in place to help the little man and others that were there. So those little men and women could feed their children. As a Prime Minister, Alan was of the view that colonialism, as I said, had a conscience, which showed us the level of his thinking and ideology. Yet, I again repeat, without a doubt, that this individual is a total imbecile. Yet, he has the guts to call us jackasses, barking dogs. That should allow, as he says, allow them to bray. And lastly, as I said, mendicants. This has now been seen as episodes in his life that I'm sure he tries to forget. This is now much clearer as he now being the opposition leader. Now the media is bringing back to the fore all the things he said. Therefore, we now have to go in. What we now have to go into is how this individual ever became leader of the United Workers' Party, and now still as opposition leader. What it shows is the level of fear he has put into his followers. It is even clearer now than when he first came into office. The only thing he understands a little about and has in his grey matter is tourism. Yet, as Minister of Tourism and Prime Minister for 5 years, he never had one hotel built in this country. Yet he still fails to understand anything about economics, development, and leadership. This leader of the opposition, when Prime Minister was confronted with a world pandemic, which in theory he failed to understand, that saving lives was more important than money. He told people of the protocols, and yet he was using taxpayers' money to fund 200 COVID-19 wardens, whom many was of the view were almost, and as has been alleged, 99% UWP supporters. I don't want people to forget that most of the attitude of this individual when he was Prime Minister, that it had nothing to do with whether one was red, especially when COVID was on, blue or yellow. But that he was the prime minister, he should have realized that he was the prime minister of the country and the people as a whole. Philip understands that. And that is why many of them are still in high positions in the public service. During that period, there were major defects in personnel management. This individual knew nothing about keeping public expenditure firmly under control. What he failed to understand was that excessive government spending can only be financed by borrowing or taxes, since borrowing fuels inflation and taxation increases inflationary pressures and reduces the incentive to work, and that both were to be avoided if one can. But we are a small country. One must remember that. I'm not an economist, yet I know a little more on the subject than the leader of the opposition, who has said several times that he has part of a degree in economics, and that he's a financier, etc. In fact, that he is, as Philip said in the House, a guru at everything, and knowing it all, as what alleged or said by the Prime Minister. Today, listening to this guy criticizing the government, you would think that he was of that mode, the guru mode, yet everything is written for him in order to spill out the crap he spouts out at present. He did not understand a simple thing, that the process of encouraging greater efficiency is the use of resources was also designed to meet the good housekeeping objective of control and to make easier the objective of keeping down public expenditure as a whole. Philip knew that from his boyhood days, looking at his father, who was a policeman, and mother, teacher. He also did not, understand that when he, as Minister of Tourism, funded Boxing in Paradise, which was a complete failure, and his DSH project, which was also costly, and was simply a drain on the finances of the country. Oh, by the way, were they not going to build, as I said once again, those 22 islands in Beaufort? We saw no reforms under Allen's prime ministership. What we saw was nothing but pure hot air being blown out of many parts of his body. He is also the same prime minister who simply failed to communicate his party's policies or plans. The present government has already put tax reforms in place. And not only that, it is beginning to plug the holes, or they are beginning to plug the holes in the roads that was left behind by the last government. If one will remember, they tried to plug them so as to be pushing to the effect, which was was flashing mirrors before the election, as though they were doing something positive. What we are seeing at present, with the numerous problems that's taking place at the cul-de-sac junction, are problems of the past government doing, and people should now be given the facts and not blame this government for that. I tell all St. Lucians, from what I know, that St. Jude's Hospital should have been finished within 9 months. And remember what I'm saying, after the fire. As I've said before, I still have the plans which hold here a Taiwanese company who was here putting the finishing touches in places like the mental hospital, and who built the tennis academy, and also was responsible for all the work that was done at the Agricultural Center at Union. You remember all of that? The prawns, the tilapia, the orchids. I want to remind the public once again, so that they never forget it was under the UWP, who was in power then, in 2009, when the fire occurred. Yet the government who came after expanded the plans, that's Kenyan then, And the hospital was almost 90% finished when Alan took over from the Kenny administration. I also want to remind the United Records of the Poor Party and the people of the country, who was the Minister of Infrastructure in 2009 when the fire took place. It was no other than the Poodle of Alan. That is very important because people and politicians have a short memory, and so they pretend. But facts are facts, and without a doubt I have those on paper. As I mentioned before, when I came back from my second research fellowship in 2016 from Taiwan, I brought back a few documents dealing with the St. Jude Hospital, which I then passed over to the Minister of Infrastructure. Once again, as I have mentioned on several occasions, before that box at St. Jude was built, it was simply a joke when it was built to fool the voters of this country. More so, Vieux-Fort that the government was building something that would make the area unique, or hospital unique. This, in my view, was again Prime Minister Yeowood's flashing mirrors so as to win the election with false information. I'll take my next break here and I will be back. And I just want to say, when we talk about your research fellowship, when I talked about that, that was done at the Academia Sinica. Go and check it. So it is the top research place, one of the top research places in the world or in the Far East. So I'll be back. Welcome back to Moving Forward. And as I was talking about that box, I will say without a doubt, and I've said it many times, it was simply a waste of time and money and should never have been built because it did not even have a well-built interior that would sustain it inside, but only the outside was concentrated on so as to give a false illusion of beauty, which was simply crap. It reminds me of some products from China that when you see it on the outside, it looks great, but lasts only a short while. That is why I have come to the conclusion, never buy anything made in China now. It simply does not last. They love creating illusions to lead people astray because it was their style, as they were not honest in anything that they did or promised. Just like the United Records of the Poor. Looking back, what we saw when Alan became Prime Minister and his poodle as Minister of Infrastructure was an episode of continually giving the public false information. They seem engulfed in complicating the truth from fiction. It was always their idea of suppression and untruths. This, in my view, showed that they had no respect for the people or the voters of this country. And now you want to come back again? Why? Because of their dishonesty and creation of false information. They always tried to create an illusion. What I envisage is that the party followers always seem to genuflect to their leader and PM. Then, that's why they make comments sometimes that is unintelligible. Why? Because he was all about autocracy, dishonesty, and incompetence. He did what he wanted because he dangled a few things in front of his supporters, and they were quick to bite the hand. Yes, bite the hand that fed them, before ascertaining what they were biting. I simply ask Alan, as Prime Minister, to show me one thing that you built as a government. I would simply say to myself, nada. That means, if he didn't know, nothing. But however, I can show him and others who support him the many things they broke down or dismantled and the heavy cost it incurred to the country. These individuals in the last government simply did not understand that we are all subjected to the rule of law and not the rule of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, even now we need the courage in the fight to save our country. It must not be about principle and the betterment of, that's what it should be, of all St. Lucians. What we saw from the last government continually smack of hypocrisy. What I continually saw from them personally was the propensity for mendacity, which is a fancy word for lying. In my view, as a government, they virtually have zero credibility. I'm trying my best to set the record straight. Their ministers, in my view, did things willingly or unwillingly because they simply had to peddle the false narrative. I say this openly, that in their time in office, what we saw was a polarization and politicization, which has now become the norm and acute in St. Lucia since their period in office. They seem to follow their leader and therefore were complicit in spreading disinformation, misinformation, both in government and in opposition. They just did not believe in transparency and accountability. These seems like a virus to them. Was it COVID-19? I don't know if it was part of that. In my view, the bottom is falling out of their conniving ways. What we see from them at present is sheer arrogance, and it is personified. They are trying their best to undermine the great work that Philip is doing so far. There is a form of weaponization taking place. They are simply chilled by the PM, who has gone so far from the beginning to put St. Lucia back on an even keel. It is at this juncture, in our preparation for the next election, I advise the government to beef up their PR, because at present it is lacking the thrust and bite that is necessary. However, it must be accurate, because the opposition has so many different avenues for putting out their lies and the fabrication of their news. Therefore, the government has to be on the alert. The Prime Minister cannot do it all on his own. Please understand that. He has to run the country. That is why we heard him, even in the House, when he says that he has been advised to disregard the leader of the opposition. However, he said he cannot idly stand by when the opposition leader continually hits at him. He cannot to be assent when lies and innuendos have been thrown at him, poor chap. To an extent, I do understand what he's saying, and I sympathize with him. And Prime Minister, that's why I will be there for you. However, you must never forget, or people must never forget, that the Prime Minister, and he has, I'm saying that to him, sorry, that he has to take the high ground. And don't worry about Alan and his reprobates. I want to remind him as to what Carl Schmitt advised us nearly a century ago, and with some poignancy. He said democracy is not a given any more than it is an entitlement. But its very nature, by its very nature, democracy permits the anti-democratic to shout as loud as the democratic. I also remind the Prime Minister of what Aristotle long ago advised. And he said, if political communities are to hold together, the politics of friendship and compassion remains just as vital as the science of laws. So tonight, before closing, I want to point out that Philip, in his own way, is a leader. because leaders change lives, and he's doing so right now. However, I also want to point out to all politicians, more so in this country, and it is that people who are willingly or unable to build solid, lasting relationship soon discover that they are also unable to sustain lasting, effective leadership. I say this to all ministers of this country because the last were useless and pathetic at this, because they thought that they could use people as cannon fodder in their whims and fancies. That will certainly backfire when you least expect, if you practice that. Therefore, be as truthful as you can with your supporters, because you need them to stay in power. Ladies and gentlemen, be warned. Again, I repeat and say to you all, let 1,000 flowers bloom under the leadership of Philip Joseph Pierre as the leader, not only for now, but for the next 10 to 15 years, if he chooses, if he wishes to carry on. Tonight I want to end by going into the depths of philosophy by quoting the epistle to the Romans. And I quote, "Owe to no man anything, but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." I also want to remark on a short treatise on true piety, where Leibniz affirmed that one cannot love God who is invisible if one does not love his neighbor who is visible. This is very important to comprehend. The writer Hooker, like Shakespeare, appreciated the value of reason, for he writes, "Goodness is seen with the eye of understanding, and the light of that eye is reason." He also pointed out that Aquinas, and that is Thomas, he pointed out that humanity is bounded by its capacity to reason. And it is human reason which describes positive laws for the common benefit. Brothers and sisters, I want to remind each and every one of you that we are in the eyes of the One Most High. Let us respect one another. And this is what I ask every parent tonight, to inculcate this into their children, because life is given by the One Most High, and He has the right to take it, not you. I therefore say to each and every parent tonight again, that you too are responsible for the future you create or we create. I also want to remind you all that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Prime Minister, remember that. So now let us say quite categorically, from the next thing we must be concerned about, if we are to have peace in this country of ours, is to go with goodwill towards all men and women, and the non-violent affirmation of the sacredness of all human life, yours and mine. I believe truly and sincerely that every man and woman is somebody because he or she is a child of God. Those who love peace must organize as effectively as war or propaganda is being spread by the opposition, as effectively as the hawks of war. However, I say to my brothers and sisters tonight, as they spread their propaganda in the way they do, let us spread the propaganda in another way, that of peace, under this government. We must combine the fervor of all the communities we love, who love peace, to demonstrate, teach, and preach until the very foundation of this country is shaken. We must work consistently to lift this country that we so love to a higher destiny, with Philip as our Prime Minister, to a new plateau of compassion, and to a more noble expression of humaneness. Yet, yes, I have tried, to be honest, because to be honest is to confront the truth, no matter how unpleasant and inconvenient the truth may be. I believe that we must expose and face it if we are to achieve a better quality of life. for all our children and their children to come. Let us not become a country of greed, malice, because then we become greedy and measure success by what is done for us personally instead of what is done for the country as a whole. I want to say to each and every one of you to search your hearts and mind in terms of the 5 years we had in 2016 to 2021 and recall some of the things that the last government had done and said that was total lies. Even during COVID, when the World Bank gave help in terms of loans to third world countries like ours, tell me who benefited. I just want you to be honest with yourself when you compare the last government with that of Philip Joseph Pierre, and what he has done in 30 months in office. This is the thought I leave you with, to compare and contrast between them. Please don't forget that the last Prime Minister said he needed 10 years to put the country on track. Yet Philip is doing what he did not do at every level of government in 30 months so far. Brothers and sisters, I ask you once again to go in peace, serve the One Most High, and to never forget that many of us were born black and should be proud of that. Regardless what we are, we must always, think of the One Most High. True, therefore, peace and love to you all. Go in peace to serve our Maker. Peace and love, brothers and sisters. Good night to you. And good night. Go in peace.